You know the Guardians of the Galaxy is the punchline, the mixtape, the dance-off. That's the mask. In the comics, the same team plays a different sport. Star-Lord becomes Master of the Sun, not just a guy with blasters. Adam Warlock's shadow isn't a vibe, it's Magus, a future that tries to happen. And Starhawk doesn't predict the turn, he remembers it. So here's the mission. I'm ranking the Guardians on a 7-level ladder from pure skill and tech all the way up to forces that rewrite outcomes. This isn't about who hits hardest. It's about what layer of reality you're operating on. And at the very bottom of that ladder, power looks deceptively small because it's built for places where mistakes don't get second chances. Here's the truth the mixtape version hides. Even at the lowest rung, the Guardians operate where most heroes can't breathe. Ops isn't weak. Ops is surviving vacuum, debris storms, collapsing holes, and alien kill corridors where one wrong assumption turns the room into an airlock. This tier isn't about raw power. It's about functioning in environments that actively erase mistakes. That distinction matters because Marvel doesn't treat space like a bigger city. In cosmic stories, the setting is hostile by default. Gravity lies, sound disappears, cover drifts, and the margin for error is measured in seconds of oxygen. Kraglin shows what that really means. The fin and arrow look like a trick weapon until you stop thinking of it as a projectile and start thinking of it as area control. In Zero-G, there is no front line, no stable cover. Kraglin isn't aiming at people, he's carving movement paths. The arrow bends through space, curves around obstacles, forces enemies to move where they don't want to move. In Ravager culture, survival isn't about strength, it's about control of chaos. Kraglin inherits Yondu's weapon, but more importantly, Yondu's philosophy. Space isn't conquered, it's navigated. The fin doesn't just kill targets, it denies zones, collapses angles, and turns three-dimensional environments into traps. That's the first ops principle most people miss. You don't win the fight, you decide which parts of the fight are allowed to happen. Jack Flag represents the same tier from the opposite direction. No cosmic gifts, no altered DNA, no ancient bloodline, just a human body conditioned for environments that were never designed for humans to survive. In the comics, Jack Flag exists in a strange space between street level and cosmic. A soldier who keeps getting pulled upward because he doesn't fail when the world stops making sense. Jack Flag doesn't dominate scenes, he stabilizes them. He holds ground that shouldn't be holdable. He absorbs pressure meant to collapse a line, not because he's invulnerable, but because he knows how to endure just long enough. That's not flashy power, that's operational power. In cosmic teams, the ability to remain functional under impossible conditions is often more valuable than raw offense. Jack Flag doesn't end conflicts, he keeps them open long enough for someone else to resolve them, and that's why he belongs here. Rocket is where the tier's philosophy crystallizes. Strip away the explosions and sarcasm, and Rocket is one of Marvel's most dangerous thinkers under pressure. He's not a bruiser. He's not a genius in a lab. He's an improvisational engineer who builds solutions while the room is on fire. In the comics, Rocket's real gift isn't tech, it's correctness. He identifies the real threat faster than anyone else. He rigs doors, overloads systems, and creates false signals that pull attention while the real exit opens somewhere else. His traps aren't about killing, they're about misdirection. In space, where assumptions kill faster than bullets, being correct is godlike. Rocket doesn't overpower rooms. He redesigns them in real time, under fire, with whatever is available. That's ops. Gear over genes. Tactics over stats. Survival over spectacle. These Guardians don't change the rules of reality. They exploit them better than anyone else present. Drop them into a city block and it feels slow, not because they're limited, but because their instincts were forged where physics is louder, reactions matter more, and mercy doesn't exist. But skill has a ceiling. Eventually, even perfect tactics run into a problem they can't outplay. When the environment stops being the enemy, the body itself becomes the strategy. At this rung, the Guardians stop winning by positioning and start winning by endurance. Monster tier means the body itself becomes the strategy. No cosmic channels, no dimensional authority, no abstract rules. Just biology pushed so far past human limits that fatal becomes negotiable and attrition turns into a trap. This tier exists because Marvel's cosmic stories don't reward glass cannons. In deep space, there are no clean resets, no guaranteed rescues. If your body can't keep functioning after the hit, the story ends early. Monsters are the characters who refuse to let it end. Groot is the banner. The MCU frames him as gentle muscle. The comics frame him as something far stranger, living infrastructure. Groot isn't just a strong being, he's an ecosystem compressed into a body. Limbs spear through holes, roots rupture decks. Growth isn't linear, it's explosive. Fire doesn't end the exchange, it extends it. When Groot dies, he doesn't disappear, he redistributes. That's the key distinction. Groot doesn't trade damage, he trades time. Every attempt to clear him demands attention, focus, and resources that could have gone elsewhere. While you're trying to finish him, the fight is already slipping. That's the first monster rule. If the body doesn't end, the body controls the clock, and Groot's sacrifices, breaking himself to shield others, regrowing from fragments, aren't sentimental beats, they're strategic. In cosmic warfare, survival itself is leverage. Bug shows the same tier from the opposite direction, not mass, mechanics. Bug is one of those characters Marvel uses to quietly remind you that humanoid is not the default lifeform in space. Insect physiology scales differently. Reflex arcs are shorter. Movement patterns are alien. In zero gravity and cluttered environments, Bug doesn't react. He preempts. He doesn't meet force head-on. He arrives at joints, thrusters, pressure points. Corridors become three-dimensional mazes only he can read. You don't trade with Bug. You miss him, and the miss costs you position, momentum, and escape. That's monster tier expressed through agility instead of mass. Agent Venom completes the triangle. Where Groot refuses to end and Bug refuses to be pinned, the symbiote refuses to stay the same. The Clintar suit isn't just armor, it's a feedback system. Damage becomes data, pressure becomes fuel. A failed approach teaches the suit how not to fail again. This is why partial answers are dangerous. Chip damage doesn't wear Agent Venom down, it trains him. Half measures turn into upgrades. Every incomplete solution adds another angle, another reach, another response. This isn't regeneration as spectacle, it's adaptation as tempo. Monster tier guardians don't win by overwhelming opponents. They win by forcing overcommitment. They tax enemies who assume fights resolve cleanly. They thrive in Guardian stories because space doesn't care about fairness. It only cares whether you can keep going. That's why this tier sits above Ops and below Alien. Ops wins by controlling environments. Monsters win by refusing to end, but even the toughest body still obeys time. And once time becomes the limiting factor, power stops being about endurance and starts being about speed. Monster tier drags the clock. Alien tier runs it. This is where the Guardians stop surviving environments and start operating faster than normal combat logic allows. No cosmic authority yet, no fate engines, no divine permission. Just bodies and minds so thoroughly adapted to non-human conditions that the fight begins one beat before anyone else realizes it has. Gamora is the clearest expression of this tier. In the movies, she's framed as muscle with blades. In the comics, she's something far more precise, a being engineered and trained for a universe where hesitation is fatal. Gamora doesn't rely on spectacle because spectacle arrives too late. Her edge is anticipation. Her movements aren't reactions, they're conclusions. Distance collapses into decision. Threats resolve before they announce themselves. In zero gravity, in ship corridors, in environments where footing and orientation lie, Gamora's combat reads like inevitability. She strikes where opponents are going to be, not where they are. That's why she doesn't need cosmic amplification. By the time bigger powers come online, the exchange is already over. Nebula extends the alien tier forward. Where Gamora perfects the body, Nebula perfects revision. Her cybernetics aren't upgrades layered onto a self. They are a doctrine of constant replacement. Damage isn't something to endure, it's information to be processed. A failed approach is discarded instantly. A successful hit is studied and countered before the next panel. On the page, this shows up as rapid silhouette shifts. Blades become cannons, frames reinforce, systems reroute. Not because Nebula is transforming theatrically, But because staying the same is losing, you don't learn Nebula. You race her update cycle. And the moment you fall behind, the fight stops being competitive. Major Victory gives the tier its structure. Vance Astro isn't flashy, and that's the point. Deep space hardened, command calm, backed by disciplined psychokinesis, he embodies what Alien Tier actually represents: control of resolution. His telekinesis doesn't rewrite reality. It edits margins. A projectile nudged a degree off course. A collapse delayed half a second. A lane held just long enough for something else to close. Those changes don't look dramatic until you realize the fight resolved differently because of them. Major Victory doesn't dominate scenes. He stabilizes outcomes. That's the essence of Alien Tier. These Guardians don't win by being harder to kill. They win by making the fight happen on a tempo only they can operate at. This is the Guardians' native altitude. They live in vacuum. They fight on moving hulls. They operate where orientation, gravity, and sound can't be trusted. Avengers can reach this tier, but they usually borrow it. Suits rated for space, spells to anchor perception, gods to keep up. For the Guardians, this speed isn't a buff. It's baseline. Speed can end a fight before it starts, but it can't decide what the fight means. To do that, you need more than faster reflexes. You need authority. This is the threshold. Everything below this level wins by execution. Better tools, tougher bodies, faster perception. At Deity Tier, the Guardians start winning by definition. This is power that doesn't just act inside a fight. It decides what the fight is about. Watch the frame shift. MCU Star-Lord shows up with blasters, bravado, and luck. He survives by improvising. Comic Star-Lord widens the frame, and the light changes. As Master of the Sun, Peter Quill stops being a pilot and becomes a conduit. This isn't just energy manipulation, it's jurisdiction. The Sun, in Marvel's cosmic logic, isn't a battery, it's a regulator. Rhythm, gravity, cycle. When Quill taps into that mantle, he isn't throwing brighter attacks. He's conducting the exchange. Timing tightens or stretches on his cadence. Pressure arrives early. Retreats arrive late. Windows open when he allows them to open. That's why this form confuses people. They expect spectacle. What they get is control. Master of the Sun Quill doesn't overpower enemies. He makes their answers arrive offbeat. Plays that should be clean suddenly feel late. Reactions that should work don't. The fight isn't harder, it's mistimed. That's deity power expressed through cadence. Adam Warlock shows the same tier from the opposite direction. To most viewers, Warlock is just the gold cosmic guy. In the comics, he's something much more specific, a being engineered to interpret meaning at cosmic scale. Anchored to the soul gem, Warlock doesn't ask who hits harder. He asks what the conflict represents. That distinction matters. Warlock's greatest victories rarely look explosive. They look like pivots, a stalemate reframed, a goal redefined, a moment where the room realizes the win condition changed while it wasn't looking. He reads intent, identifies the hinge no one else is guarding, and turns the entire conflict around it. This is why Warlock is terrifying in high-level cosmic stories. He doesn't escalate fights. He ends them philosophically. That's the line between Alien and Deity. Alien Tier Guardians win because they move faster. Deity Tier Guardians win because they decide what movement means. When Warlock enters a scene, the question stops being, who wins this fight? It becomes, what outcome is justified? When Master of the Sun enters, the board stops feeling neutral. Timing itself takes sides. Choices feel constrained not by force, but by rhythm. And this is where Guardian stories diverge from Avengers stories. Avengers reach this layer through escalation. Thor's divinity, Strange's circles, relics that grant temporary authority, borrowed access. Quill and Warlock bring authority natively. Their stories don't build up to this tier. They start here. Gods can define the terms of a fight, but they still operate inside reality's rules. Dimensional power begins where those rules stop being fixed. At this rung, the fight stops being about space and starts being about structure. Dimensional power doesn't pressure the board. It edits the system the board obeys. Thought, purpose, life force, archetypes. This is the tier where power no longer needs to be present everywhere to be felt everywhere. The influence radiates outward automatically, changing what actions are possible before anyone takes them. Moondragon is the clearest expression of this. To casual readers, she looks like a powerful telepath. In the comics, she's something much stranger, a being trained to operate at the level where decisions themselves become manipulable objects. This isn't mind reading, it's decision shaping. Moondragon doesn't dominate minds by force. She removes certainty. She trims away options that feel safe. A plan that should work suddenly doesn't, not because it was countered, but because the mental ground that made that plan coherent has shifted. Her victories look quiet because they happen beneath action. A room changes direction. A team hesitates. A confident move never happens. Her reach isn't measured in distance. It's measured in futures. That's why Moondragon belongs here instead of deity tier. She doesn't define meaning. She edits possibility. She doesn't decide what the fight is about. She decides which paths can still be taken. Avatar of Life Drax expresses the same tier from the opposite side. At lower levels, Drax is framed as a blunt instrument. At this tier, he stops being muscle and becomes a vector. His power isn't rage, it's alignment. Life force keyed, purpose encoded. This version of Drax doesn't need to win exchanges. He makes certain outcomes expensive and others inevitable. Attrition that should exhaust him converts into pressure. Damage that should bury him becomes momentum. Survival isn't a side effect, it's the engine. That's why this form of Drax feels different from monster tier endurance. Monster bodies refuse to end. Dimensional bodies bend outcomes. Drax's presence pushes the fight toward preservation, correction, continuation. Not because he hits harder, but because reality around him begins to prefer those outcomes. You don't feel this as force. You feel it as drift. What unites dimensional tier is global influence without local dominance. Moondragon doesn't need to stand in every lane. Her influence reaches them anyway. Drax doesn't need to dominate every exchange. His principle bleeds into them regardless. Together, they tax the opponent's mental stack with fewer clean lines, more second-guessing, more forced sequencing. This is why Guardians hold this tier natively. Avengers often meet it through translators, sorcerers to ward minds, constructs to anchor the intangible, external tools that convert raw power into system-level influence. The Guardians already speak this language because their stories live where identity, purpose, and survival intersect. But even systems have ceilings. As long as outcomes are still negotiable, the story can resist. Doom tier power is what happens when resistance stops mattering. At this tier, power stops being something you use and starts being something you impose. Doom tier Guardians don't escalate fights. They decide whether fights are even allowed to resolve. Damage becomes optional. Tempo becomes conditional. Outcomes happen because the script permits them to happen. Starhawk is inevitability given form. Most characters react to the future. Starhawk remembers it. His consciousness exists across multiple lifetimes, looping forward and backward, carrying memory like gravity. When he enters a scene, it doesn't feel tense. It feels pre-solved. Traps weren't set earlier. They were set before earlier mattered. That's why Starhawk is so unsettling in Guardian stories. You're not outplayed in the moment, you're corrected by a memory you didn't know existed. He doesn't rush decisions because he's already lived the consequences. What looks like foresight is actually rehearsal. This is the key misunderstanding that gets people killed around him. Timing is no longer neutral. If Starhawk has seen the ending, your surprise isn't a surprise. It's a beat he already priced in. Every clean line you're proud of feels like it should work, and then doesn't, because it resolved 3 turns ago in another lifetime. The only way to fight him isn't to move faster, it's to desynchronize the outcome, break clean sequences, delay resolutions, force him to spend effort repairing the future instead of closing the present. That's the Doom tier logic shift. The fight becomes about whether inevitability gets to cash out cleanly. Magus is the broken ceiling of this tier. He isn't Evil Adam Warlock, he's destiny weaponized. Magus is what happens when Warlock's ability to interpret meaning loses restraint. He doesn't ask what the conflict represents, he decides which endings are allowed to exist. Where Starhawk manages inevitability, Magus declares it. When Magus enters the board, the question stops being, how do we beat him? It becomes, is this future permitted? That's why racing him fails. You can't outrun a script. You can't outdamage a conclusion. If you try to meet Magus head-on, you're already playing the ending he wants you to reach. The only counterplay is interruption. Break the tutoring lines. Force off-curve resolutions. Attack the hinge that lets inevitability close cleanly. Every resource Magus spends fixing destiny is tempo. He's not spending ending the story. This is why Doom tier Guardians feel fundamentally different from Deity or Dimensional characters. Deity defines meaning. Dimensional edits systems. Doom decides whether the story is allowed to end at all. And this is where Guardian stories naturally live. Avengers reach this altitude through escalation like time stones, reality resets, cosmic hacks, just to stay upright. Doom tier Guardians arrive already fluent. Their power isn't borrowed, it's structural. At this level, fights don't trade damage, they trade outcomes. And sometimes, even outcomes aren't up for debate. At this tier, characters stop being pieces on the board and start being rules the board must obey. Enigma tier Guardians don't manage inevitability. They don't impose outcomes. They are the outcome. This is where power stops being something you spend and starts being something you enforce by existing. Cosmic Ghost Rider is the most readable expression of this tier. On paper, he looks like a mashup, Ghost Rider plus Cosmic Fire. In practice, he's something far more unsettling. The flame isn't heat, it's judgment. Not punishment after the fact, but consequence preloaded into every action taken near him. When Cosmic Ghost Rider enters a scene, choices begin collapsing. Not because he attacks, but because every move now carries moral weight. Retreats feel wrong, aggression feels expensive. Characters start reacting to what they might be condemned for, not what they might survive. That's the Enigma shift. The board doesn't respond to damage, it responds to verdict. He doesn't need to finish fights. He makes continuing them untenable. Routes disappear. Options narrow. Eventually, the story resolves itself because there's nowhere left to stand that doesn't incur consequence. Phyla-Vell expresses the same tier from a quieter, colder angle. In her highest expressions, avatar states tied to life and death axes, she doesn't overwhelm opponents. She pulls the narrative. The fight drifts toward an ending, not because anyone chose it, but because the universe around her begins preferring resolution. You don't feel this as pressure. You feel it as inevitability. Trade stops swinging back. Comebacks stop forming. The story narrows until only one ending still fits. Renewal, if aligned. Oblivion, if not. And this is where most people misunderstand Enigma tier power. You don't beat an endpoint by hitting it harder. You beat it by denying the conditions that let it exist. Against Enigma tier Guardians, strategy stops being optimization and becomes permission. Which outcomes are allowed to happen? Which ones are forbidden? Once that decision is made, the rest of the fight is just gravity. This is the ceiling of the Guardians ladder because it's the ceiling of interaction itself. At this altitude, Avengers stories usually invoke abstracts, cosmic tribunals, universal resets, Deus Ex artifacts to close the page. The Guardians don't need to summon endings. They carry them, not stronger. Different sourcing. At Enigma tier, the game doesn't end because someone wins. It ends because only one ending is still allowed to happen. And that's the shape of power the Guardians actually live on. The mixtape, the jokes, the dance-off. That's the mask. Lift it. And the Guardians of the Galaxy reveal a very different shape of power. One that isn't about who hits hardest, but about what layer of reality you're operating on. At the bottom, skill keeps you alive where physics doesn't care. Then biology refuses to end. Speed outruns reaction. Authority defines meaning. Systems bend outcomes. Inevitability rewrites futures. And at the very top, power stops acting on the story and becomes the ending itself. That's why the Guardians feel strange if you only know the movies. They aren't a ladder of strength. They're a ladder of sources. And once you learn to read the source skill, biology, cadence, judgment, destiny, the chaos starts making sense. This isn't trivia, it's clarity. It's understanding why Star-Lord as Master of the Sun isn't just Peter Quill with more glow. Why Magus isn't a villain, he's a future trying to happen. Why Starhawk feels unfair. Why Cosmic Ghost Rider doesn't need to swing first. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Next time you see a Guardian you don't recognize, don't ask, what can they do? Ask, what layer do they operate on? If this changed how you see the Guardians and made the universe feel sharper instead of louder, subscribe. And tell me which character confused you the most when you first saw them. Because the deeper you go into Marvel lore, the less random it gets, and the more intentional it becomes.